Welcome back to Jewish Wisdom on JTV. Today we're joined by Rabbi and Dayan, which means judge, Binstock. Dayan Binstock is a judge on the London Beth Din, which is the London Jewish legal court.
Court of the Chief Rabbi.
The Court of the Chief Rabbi. And we thought we'd discuss some interesting legal and controversial Jewish issues, which you probably deal with on a daily basis. So I want to start off with an issue which is referred to as Agunot. Now, some of our viewers might not be aware of what this is or so familiar with it, but I just want to sort of so I'll outline it briefly and then we'll get into discussion, which is that if a partner wants to get a divorce, they have to get a get. But it requires the consent of each partner.
Sure.
And if you have one partner that says, no, I don't want to get a divorce, even though the other one does, then they can sort of be held captive. So both partners have to give consent.
A get has to be given freely and received freely.
Right,
yes.
right. So you have situations, and I'm sure you've come across them, where a wife, and actually sometimes a husband as well, is unable to move on with their life or to find another partner because the other partner, for whatever reason, they could be abusive or they could be just unwilling or emotionally attached, they're unwilling to give the get. And the question that I think bothers people at the core of this is, how can something seemingly so dysfunctional, both practically and morally, be part of God's law, which we consider to be the Torah, and something which we would expect to be wholly, morally outstanding?
Okay, I hear your question. I think it's a fair question. So let me first explain a bit of perspective as to what marriage is from a Jewish point of view. Mm-hmm. The marriage bond in English law is created when the registrar, or the priest for that matter in the Christian church, will first want to find out, are the couple eligible to marry? They're not too closely related. And then, are they willing to marry? He says, do you so-and-so takes you so-and-so to be your lawful wedded wife? I do. Your lawful wedded husband? I do. He says, and I pronounce you man and wife. So an outsider is creating the marriage bond between those two people. Mm-hmm. When I, as a rabbi, will conduct a marriage, I don't actually confer the status of marriage upon them. When the bridegroom gives a ring to the bride in the presence of the two witnesses and says, you're betrothed to me with this ring, they are creating the marriage bond between them. Mm. I'm not marrying them, they're technically marrying each other. I'm there to supervise it's being done correctly. When divorce happens, it's the same thing in reverse. A judge in English law wants to ascertain, are there grounds for the divorce? If so, he pronounces a decree nisi, then a decree absolute that dissolves the marriage bond. In Jewish law, the marriage bond was created between the parties. The marriage bond is dissolved between the parties, and it's dissolved by the bridegroom, the husband giving to the wife a Jewish bill of divorce known as a get. That's what it says in the Torah, v'katav la sefer kiritut. And the Beth Din is there to ensure it's being done correctly. And so, of course, we'll interview the husband and interview the wife and ensure that all the correct technical details are being attended to. But essentially, it's between the parties. Now, you raise a valid point that is it sort of not unconscionable that one party can obstruct this process.
Yeah.
In a sense, we're living with the practicalities of a non-ideal situation in Jewish law. If we were living in a time where there was a Sanhedrin, where we were able to exercise, the full authority of Jewish law, that problem wouldn't arise.
Why?
But because we're
Why would it not
because
arise?
we would have measures available to us. I mean, even in Israel.
You mean they would design new halakhic measures?
You could operate the full measure of the halakha. Living in
How would that work?
Put it this way: exercising authority over a husband in all sorts of ways, and possibly doing more exceptional measures in Jewish law would require the full authority of a Sanhedrin. Even in Israel, where the rabbinical authorities are able to work more closely with the secular arm, they have more measures available to them in order to deal with a recalcitrant husband.
Like penalties?
Yes, in that sense.
Financial penalties?
Well, for example, they can stop someone leaving the country.
Right.
If he or she have been uncooperative as far as the get is concerned. I have to tell you that whilst there are some cases, and each case is one too many, that we've now have much more opportunity of dealing with the situation in this country. A couple of things. First of all, there's a prenuptial agreement where it now becomes something that everyone knows about that they have to deal with. And second of all, a law was passed which gives a judge the authority to hold back the granting of a decree absolute if either the husband or the wife were prevented from remarrying as far as their religious community's requirements were concerned. And that, in a sense, as most solicitors would advise their clients, it's just not worth messing around. And many of our previously difficult cases were solved when that piece of legislation came into operation. Now, there are some difficult cases. We've appointed at the Beth Din a caseworker called Joanna Greenaway, who's done some great work in being there available full-time to follow up on difficult cases. And the list has grown steadily smaller, and the vast majority of them have been able to be dealt with. But yes, there are occasional difficult cases, but in a sense, in every legal system, there will be occasional hard cases. And we work very hard in trying to address all of these. And if we were to have all the rabbinical authorities in the world working together, there may be more possible radical solutions which we could look at. But
one would ask, why would there need to be this? Why would these issues need to arise in the first place if we're dealing with divine law? Such seemingly just painful issues which are so clearly made available by the nature of the law in this area.
Look, I mean, we regard marriage as something that's fundamental to Jewish life, and we would want
a happy marriage.
Yeah, okay, you're right. I mean, it's not that Judaism says that you have to stay in a marriage, and divorce is not something that can't be countenanced. We do have divorce, but we want to be able to support and educate marriage as much as we can. But as I say, I just come back to my previous point, it's more a function of, regrettably, not being in the state we would like to be as far as Jewish law is concerned, to be able to have the mechanisms that would address this properly.
Right.
And there are, from time to time, people have suggested possible mechanisms that might help us further, like, revoking Kiddushin, could that be done? And, scholars have written theses that would suggest, are there possibilities here? You would require a much broader consensus of rabbinic opinion across the world in order to employ these mechanisms, because if a particular rabbi says, I would regard this marriage now as dissolved, and other rabbis don't recognize it, then you're dealing with an unworkable situation, because if someone is regarded as married and they go and another rabbi says they're not married, then the consequences of that situation are not at all kind.
Why do you think it's morally better that both parties should have to agree to a divorce rather than just one party? Why do you think it's a better moral situation to have it like that? Why shouldn't it be enough for one person to say, I want out?
Either party can initiate the process, and that's what happens. Probably, at least 50% of divorces at the London Beth Din are initiated by the woman contacting the Beth Din, and that's either party can. And there will be cases where one party doesn't want a divorce; they want to stay in a marriage. So, I think at the end of the day, either party is at liberty to start that process. When it comes to the actual procedure of divorce, then we need the consent of both parties.
Right, but I'm saying, why is that? Why do you think it's better to have the consent of both parties than just say we'll rely on the consent of one?
Surely I would regard it as morally unfair if one party could say, I would want out, and the other party says no. I mean, this was the contribution of Rabbeinu Gershom, as far as Ashkenazi Jewry is concerned, where, in theory, according to Jewish law, a man could divorce his wife against her will. But he said, no, this needs to be something with the consent of the wife, and his takana is now accepted more or less worldwide as far as the Jewish world is concerned.
Right. So it applies equally to men and women, this law.
Yeah. It's so important that when we're dealing with a marriage that's broken up, that it's very unusual for it to be 100% right on one side and 100% wrong on the other side. And I think we just need to recognize where the parties are coming from, what the factors there may have been surrounding the circumstances that led up to that marital breakdown. And we just find that engaging empathetically, persistently, patiently with both parties can help us deal with difficult cases.
I also suppose in some ways, even if you didn't have an agreement, require an agreement to get a divorce by both parties, you know, you could have someone who just wouldn't want to leave their wife, regardless of whether there's a legal agreement or not. So it's more about human beings and the way they choose to act and behave, and sort of the law sort of working with that. Is that fair? Is that a fair comment?
I would say that. I mean, you know, in every legal system, you'll find that there are advantages and drawbacks. And there are people we see who can be victims of the current British legal system and finding it unfair to them. You know, as well as problems you may think that they may exist as far as the Jewish legal system is concerned.
To stay up to date with the latest JTV content, if you're on YouTube, click subscribe below the video and the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button, and under following, click see first.